I'm thrilled today, as usual, because Jim Koepnick is not only an independent digital journalist and photographer, he's also a Sigma ambassador. He shoots professionally for Sigma. He shoots professional not only for Sigma, but for Flying Magazine, Plane and Pilot, Cirrus Aircraft, and several other publications. He has received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Society of Aviation Photographers, and 2 times Best of the Best awards from the Aviation Week in Space Technology. One of the things that I'm excited about is not just because these are phenomenal photographers, but like many of us, they have multiple interests, rich stories to tell, and a path that has led them to where they are. How did you start? Share with us your career path and what led you to what you do now.
Well, I've always had an interest in photography from being pretty little, but in 1979, I had the opportunity to take some pictures for the local newspaper. The correspondent needed a photographer, and I got asked to do it. And the newspaper liked what I did. The relationship built. I think I worked about almost every job except delivering the newspaper, and worked my way up to photographer and assistant regional editor. And from there, EAA was moving up to Oshkosh, Wisconsin to make it their national or international headquarters. So I applied and got the chief photographer position, and worked there for 28 years, which obviously got me well into the aviation photography. And from there, I went freelance in 2012, and that allowed me to work for a lot of other magazines. And interesting enough, I also went back and worked for the newspaper, freelance, for the same one I started with, the Oshkosh Northwestern, and worked for them up until last year. And what I like about it is it's so diverse. It lets me do just about anything I want to do. So I can still do aviation. I still do. I shoot for Cirrus. I shoot for Plane and Pilot magazine. And I have friends that fly, so I'm always dabbling in something with that. But I get to shoot people, and I get to shoot what's happening now, and kind of pretty much do what I want with Sigma. They just kind of let me shoot what I want to shoot, and I think we're all having fun with it.
Okay. Tell us a bit about your gear transition. I suspect that, like many of us, you started either with film or with other technologies, and then you slowly evolved into things like DSLR and mirrorless. And I know you shoot all of those today. So I was wondering if you can walk us through some of your either thought process or what circumstances led for you trying these different technologies, and kind of your perspective on where you've been and where you are today gear-wise.
When I started out, I was shooting film, obviously back in the 70s, that's what we shot. And at the newspaper, most of it was black and white. So we rolled our own film, developed our own film, printed our own pictures. And then we started getting into color, and it was really complicated from a newspaper standpoint. But I started learning that. Doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, but when you're developing it yourself and trying to make sure you're coming back with an assignment that's working, it did get to be complicated. From there, I went to EAA, and I was used to shooting available light. And when I got to EAA, we were shooting color slides. And so lighting got to be a lot more important. And I was lucky to have a boss that had done work in Hollywood and really knew lighting. So I learned that. I learned how to use tungsten light, hot light, quartz lights, 4 or 5 or 6 sometimes in a setup in the studio. Learned how to light on location and how important it was to use multiple lights and backlights and make your picture look that's up to the film side. When I started out, I was shooting any camera I could afford, and when I got to the newspaper, Nikon is what they were using, and Nikon is the name that I had heard everybody was using. So I traded in a boat that I had, actually, a speedboat, bought my first Nikon, got through the paper and was still using it when I got to EAA. And they were sponsored by Canon, so the Nikons got put aside and I started using Canon. They had just started going over to the EOS system about that time. So I got into autofocus, and we were using Canon film cameras. And the first digital cameras were not the best. I'm trying to think of, it was $14,000 and it was a 4-megapixel camera with terrible color. It was kind of funny, but it was all learning, and we learned as we went along. And the same with printing. We were doing slides and we were doing black and white pictures. We had a beautiful darkroom, and now all of a sudden we're doing printing on digital printers. So the whole thing was an interesting transition to go through it. I had shot 4x5, I shot 8x10 film, Hasselblads with 2 1/4, so I was used to a lot of different formats in film, and now we come along with digital, and the quality just isn't there in the beginning. So I went through the whole evolution of that up to where we are now with my Sony A7R is 62 megapixels, something like that.
Right.
But the quality is so much better than we had with film cameras back then. I started shooting Sigma lenses. I got the 50 and the 35 when they came out. So I got a couple of Sigma lenses and was happy. I think I was shooting Canon at that time. Went to New York to a photo show and ran into Dave Metz, who used to be the head of Canon, at least on the level I had to deal with. He was when I was at EAA, and now he was with Sigma. So we sat down and talked, and he knew that I was good at aviation. So he said, we're looking to fill this little niche of aviation photography. I want to send you a couple of lenses on loan to try and see what you can do with writing and talk about this. So I wrote them a blog on the 150 to 600 and a little fly-in I was at. They liked the pictures, they liked my writing, and that was 4 years ago, I think, and it's just kind of kept going since then. And now I probably shoot, I'm shooting 100% Sigma glass. I'm shooting all Sony with an occasional Canon here and there in case I need it for a special assignment. I'll actually, for the people that shoot Canon and Nikon, when I was shooting Nikon, it was always whatever top of the line was. So the 1DX, that was the last one that I had of theirs, but 2 1DXs for sports and aviation, which would include air show and all ground sports, field sports. And when I went to Nikon, I had 2 D5s and I had a couple of little ones in between there, but I ended up with 2 D850s. So what I wanted was the sports camera, the fast shutter speed, or the fast frame rate, good high ISO, and then I wanted a couple of cameras that I could shoot other assignments with that had the quality, that had the higher megapixel, and maybe they had some other bells and whistles that were good for like event photography or portraits. So now that I'm with Sony, shooting Sony, I have 2 A9 Mark IIs, and those are my A7R4. That's the high megapixel. And I did not get a second one because I'm not doing as much work. I haven't this last year. I'm kind of letting some of the jobs go to the side and trying to do a little bit more of what I want to do. So I've only got one of the high megapixel cameras. And then I've got one of their crop sensor cameras, the A6500, that I use on the street or use I'll mount a camera on an airplane. So it's a really good camera to do that with.
Yeah, that goes to speak to your flexibility and capability that you can shoot all these different brands and then mix and match. How do you like the FP? I was quite intrigued by it when it came out. The Outex concept was always founded on the notion of modularity and being able to accommodate multiple things. And when I was chatting with the folks from Sigma, they seem to indicate that that's precisely the vision that they have for that camera, is to be modular, akin to maybe a red digital cinema. What are your impressions of the FP so far? How do you like it? How do you use it?
I'd say you nailed it with the modularity. I I like it. The image quality is fantastic. You know, it's the smallest, lightest, full frame, mirrorless on the market. It's really good with cinema. But on the still side, I find it's really good on the street, for one thing. It's really good for a remote camera. I've got a star tracker that goes on it. Because the camera's so small and light, fits on real easy. It's got a built-in intervalometer. I know when I give talks on the camera, that's one of the things that really impresses me. And I know other cameras have that, but to use it for a camera, to mount it on like an airplane, to shoot remote shots as it's flying around, to shoot stars, it's so nice to be able to just turn on a intervalometer that's built into the software that is easy to figure out, easy to use, and you just kind of hit the button and walk away, and you get to come back and see what kind of cool pictures you caught.
Do you have a specific photo category that is a passion? Is aviation it? Do you have others, or is it like picking a favorite child?
You know, aviation is fun for me, but I'm not a pilot. I've tried a couple of times. I just don't have the actual passion that some people do. For me, aviation was always the people I worked with, and the group that worked for me, and so it was more that, the camaraderie. If I have I mean, newspaper in general is, if I have a passion, it's that, but it's the passion to go out and shoot the day as it changes from today to tomorrow, to shoot people, to capture life as it's happening. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you want to use the word lockdown or quarantine. Wisconsin uses safer at home, but I can't really go out and shoot a lot of people on the street. But at the newspaper, we called it feature photography. It was just get an idea, you know, go try to find some life, or get an idea and expand on it, and you know, see where you can run with it. The nice thing about working for a magazine is that they want to do a story, so it's nice to go flying with someone and shoot those dramatic air-to-air pictures. But when you're shooting a story, you need to do a nice portrait of the pilot. You need to do details on the airplane and what makes it unique. You need to do, I don't want to call it a landscape picture, but you need to do wider pictures of the airplane as it's sitting on the ground. So you get to practice a lot of different skills in trying to make this whole story come together visually. You know, that's interesting, because when I got hired at EAA, when they moved to Oshkosh in 1984, I was hired as chief photographer, and a friend of mine in town was hired as the staff photographer. So we were working together, and I wanted to bring photojournalism to their magazines and to a lot of their PR work, because that was my passion at the time, was photojournalism. So I was concerned with doing things on the ground that were really strong visually. So I let Carl, my friend, do the air-to-air work at that time. So he'd go up in one airplane and they'd shoot another for a magazine assignment. Carl ended up with a heart problem, so he couldn't do it. So I'm going to send you the picture of my first one, because it's just horrible. But, you know, when you go up and no one's telling you what to do, you learn from scratch, and then you build on your mistakes. So I built on my mistakes, and, you know, I think I got it down fairly well. I have a style. The one you have up right now, that's one of my styles, is, you know, kind of, in fact, I like to even be tighter, but, you know, it's fun to do now when I do it. It's, you know, I know what I'm looking for. I know, I keep trying to raise the bar a little bit, but the fireworks shot, you know, not on the ground. Lately, everybody is doing fireworks shots at air shows. They're having night shows and fireworks. So this one, I was trying to be a little different with the curve of the cockpit over on the side, and the glare, the highlights gleaming off of that, and then fireworks in the background.
Philosophy, you know, I hear your description of telling a story when you're writing a piece, or when you're hired to do an article, for example, you're telling a story. Do you think of aviation photography as the kind of photography where you're painting a picture and you have an idea, especially as you've gained experience, of the picture that you're trying to paint with your photos, and then you have things like lenses and settings in mind? Or are you doing different and things happen and you're just trying to capture the moment? Does it fall into one of those? Is it both?
It's both. What I do, I'm thinking there were a couple of pictures in there. Well, even the fireworks picture, but if I'm doing one at night where I'm going to light an airplane up, I've got something in my mind that I know I want to get. I want, a sunset, and where am I going to put the lights, and I'm trying to get a feel to that. But when I do, and my pilot, I've had the same pilot for 30 some years, I think, 35 years maybe. And when we go do something, he'll give a briefing, and he'll go into all the safety things that's needed, because safety is the first issue with what we're doing when we're flying through airplanes. But after that, we go up and we look for the light and we look for the clouds, and we don't say we're going to go to this spot and make 3 turns and then go to this thing. And it isn't that structured. We've got the safety down. We know everything we need to do. Now we're just going to go have fun with it. And you fall into some beautiful things with clouds that, we'll head west, and all of a sudden one of us will look and say, hey, there's better clouds to the east, and we turn the whole flight around. And we've come into some pretty good things doing that.
Interesting. So I was going to ask you, how much direction or latitude do you have with the pilots? It sounds like you get to ask and request and try to set things up. How does that work?
Yeah, we don't do anything really dangerous. Everything is, I don't know, I was telling somebody about this the other day. It's like a standard, there's like 7 angles. You can try some, we're falling into different backgrounds, but there's still like a basic 7 angles in my mind when I'm shooting an air-to-air. But sometimes it's the transition from one angle to the other, or when they're moving into a different position, all of a sudden it all comes together. So you just have to be prepared. But a lot of it is just, as long as the pilot is on the radio, is always talking to my pilot, we always know what he's doing. We just kind of wing it, and it's by where's the light, where are the clouds, where's the background, what's going to make the best picture.
Okay. And do you have different cameras that you preset? Do you have, now that you've gotten more experience, different situations that you expect, so that maybe one is to do the shots that you envision, that you think you're trying to get, and then a different one that's in a different setting that is more about spontaneity, for example? Well,
I have 2 basic camera setups that I go with. And one is like a Sony A9 Mark II with a 70-200 Sigma on it. And that is the main camera that I'm going to use for air-to-air work. 70-200, for me, it just works out perfect. It lets me frame the plane tight if I want, go looser. I like the narrower focal length, just because I don't see so much clutter in the background. So that I'm going to do almost everything with. Then I carry a 24-70 either on another A9 Mark II, or I'll put it on the A7R4, just so I have that extra megapixels for the wider shot. If an editor is thinking of, they want to do a 2-page spread and they want the plane a little bit off center, and they want to put type over on the other side, the bigger file works great for that, and the wider lens works great for that. So what I'm thinking of is, how much can I vary this up? I'm going to shoot tight, I'm going to shoot horizontal and vertical, and then I'm going to shoot wider with the 24-70 and give them some room for layout.
That is so cool. Yeah. What's the craziest, obviously safety is in everyone's best interest, but what are some of the craziest circumstances? I imagine you've flown through conditions that have changed, somewhat unexpectedly, or turbulence, or situations where it caught you by surprise. What are some stories that you can share with us about that?
We haven't had too many really bad ones, but up in a B-25 bomber to go to a little warbird fly out and see if we could shoot any other airplanes. So we did that. We're coming back to Oshkosh, and about halfway there, the intake manifold blew on one of the engines. So fire was coming out, and they shut it down, called a mayday, and needed an emergency landing. So that was probably the scariest thing I've ever had. Everything worked out fine. You know, there was no fire. We landed fine. The video guy and I went to the nearest bar to the airfield after that and had a beer and talked about we were going to sell our equipment and go to Mexico, but just for a little humor in it.
Yeah.
But, you know, outside of that, you know, we don't take a lot of chances. You know, there's the occasional time when someone is not paying attention. You tell them to go left and they go right, and they kind of slide toward you. But we're trained to, you know, keep an eye on that and just get out of the way. So.
Okay. Do you shoot? Let's talk about your settings on some of these shots. And one of the things that I like about a lot of the work that you post is that you often share the settings that you used, which, you know, for a photographer can be very informative. And I think we already got a question, and I invite others to ask questions as well and keep them coming. But are you, for example, in this situation, playing with shutter priority, or are you always shooting on manual? Walk us through your thinking on the settings.
Okay, an interesting one I wanted to point out on this, because I carry the 70-200 and the 24-70. I mean, that is just, I do that all the time. I had a third body on this one, and I had a 60-600. Sigma had just come out with it, and I shot this with the 60-600, and I couldn't tell. I don't know that it's actually at 600 millimeters, but it really let me zoom in, and the image stabilization, I mean, you can count the little fins on the engine jugs on that. It's so sharp.
Right.
You know, things kind of almost like a sine wave. They're you know, you try to lock in on it, and you'll get the sharpness, and it'll trail off. And so I always try to think of the ones that are good and that you're going to keep are the ones that are important, not the ones you have to delete. But going back to your question, when I shoot on the ground, I'm always in aperture priority because I want to control f-stop and depth of field, and I'm using a longer lens usually, so that I want to keep an eye that my shutter speed is high enough and I'm wide open. But in the air, I shoot shutter priority, and for most of the pictures, most aviation photographers are trying to get that full circle in the propeller, and you get that at a 60th of a second. You might get it at an 80th of a second. It's all based on the RPM that the subject plane,
like this one,
the propeller is turning. But somewhere 60th and 80th, so I'll kind of lock stuff on that. But if you're shooting for someone, if this isn't just a fun thing for your friend, I call them insurance pictures. So I have some pictures that I know are going to be sharp because I have a little bit more shutter speed. It's going to compensate if there's any bumps up there. We do try to find the smoothest air possible and go higher and higher, because the air's smoother the higher you go. So we're always trying to find smooth air, but there are also bumps. So we're doing the best we can. It's a compromise between shutter speed and bumps and both planes moving a little bit. So 60th of a second or 250th. And odd little thing is I find I don't like the one in the middle, the 125, because it tends to make the propeller look like a bow tie. And I just, for me, I just think that looks weird when I see it. So the faster one does give a little blur to the prop, but you know you've got it in focus and it's going to be sharp. And then a 60th for the pictures that you really want to look nice.
That's super cool. Yeah. Aviation photography. Any advice you give them?
Well, I think everyone wants to shoot air-to-airs, and there are places, they'll have classes and seminars where you can go do that. And I think it's good to do that, but aviation, there's so much involved in it. I just did a presentation on what to shoot at an air show, and you know, and for me, it's the variety. There are portraits to be taken. There's some really cool pilots and people that attend air shows, and you can get some really good character study You can get some great kid pictures. You know, there's just a lot in the portrait area. Just airplanes on the ground. You know, how can you do it better than someone else can do it? How can you do it cleaner? How can you, you know, a lot of times I go really tight and crop things out. So what can I do on the ground that's different than somebody else? And what can I do for a night air show or a fireworks show with an airplane in front of me that is something that no one else is going to do? Air show itself, I got to give props to, and I can't even think of the names. There are some people out there that can shoot an air show plane going by with a full circle. I think if you look at that picture, that's not a full circle. I'm shooting at, I start out at a 400th of a second.
Okay.
And I know I'm going to start freezing the prop a little, but they're usually turning a little bit higher RPM through some of it. Then I'll work my way down until I'm just not getting anything sharp, and I'll work my way back up again. But I can only do what I can do with airshow, but that's a great place to see how well you can handhold, what position you can be in on the field. You know, center of the field during an air show is not necessarily the best spot. Sometimes either end is. You'll get a better shot of the airplane, or it starts turning, or it's doing something else that you're not going to see at air show center. I think it's pretty well accepted now that a 5-point safety harness is you know, the best thing to have. When I started out, we had a big climber's belt or something. And that's what we used. And then I went to a smaller climbing harness with carabiners and flat tubing. That worked out good in the one plane we were in because it wasn't that easy to fall out anyway. But a lot of the planes now where the door is coming, 2 baggage doors maybe are coming off. The 5-point harness has straps that go over your shoulders and goes around your legs. What I've done is they have these huge D-rings on them, and I take those off and I put carabiners on there that are lighter, and then make it easier for me to put safety straps on if I need it. We were probably shooting, you know, under 2,000, 3,000 feet or something like that. And I have experienced that a lot in the summer where it can be 80 or 90 degrees on the ground. And if we go up to 10,000, 11,000, 12,000 feet, it's going to be pretty cold and be in the 40s probably. So I've learned to always take jackets with me be doing that day, so I was pretty well covered. This shot right there of the Cub, it was a warm day. We were flying probably 1,000 feet or less, so it was still pretty warm, even with there's a lot of air blowing past me there, but I don't think it was all that cold.
And a lot of times I talk to DSLR lovers, and they'll argue that the speed and that, you know, the ability to get shots, especially in sports photography, with the DSLR is a must-have. How do you feel about that for aviation? Does it matter? I've noticed you shoot with both. Do you have a point of view on the technology aspect when it comes to aviation?
I think we can go 2 ways. One is if you're on the ground shooting an air show, so you've got an airplane flying by you at 200 or 300 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. I still find my Sony A9s or A9 Mark IIs are doing fine with that. Mm-hmm. You know, you're panning the plane. Even, you know, I think of you know, panning as when you're shooting something at a slow shutter speed and you're blurring the background. Well, when you're shooting an airplane coming by an air show, you can be at 2/50th or a 400th of a second, which isn't that fast or isn't that slow, but you're still panning because the plane's coming by. So I have no trouble with that. And as far as in the air, I used to think I needed to shoot really fast bursts. You know, the faster the frame rate, the better it was going to be for air to air. And looking back on it, what that did was just gave me a whole lot of pictures that looked alike. You know, hopefully they're all in focus, but you know, I don't need 20 pictures that are virtual clones of each other. So I've learned to slow down when I'm shooting air to air from high speed to the medium speed or sometimes low speed, and take more time and compose and get my pictures that way. And I'm still getting a good percentage of good ones, but I just have less that I have to edit and less I have to throw away.
Super interesting. Thank you. What are you excited about and next? I know it's kind of a weird time right now, but do you have things that you are excited and waiting for?
But I'm finding I have this time to do what I want to do now. So you mentioned I'm doing takeout food projects for the local visitors bureau, just trying to highlight food and take it up a notch and promote our local restaurants so that we don't let them down. We keep them in business until everything is back to normal. I've been doing a little self-assignment on essential workers like Julie, my friend, the nurse that's up on the screen. The mail lady was the other one. I just did one last night of a musician friend of mine that was doing a Facebook concert, and I went and did a picture of her with the mask on. And so little things like that are satisfying the creative urge I have in me. So that part of it is really good. But what I'm looking forward to is using my Outex housing on the FP.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
I've got it all set up. And one of the housings lets me put an HDMI cable in. And so I'm trying to figure out how I know the shots I want to get. I want to be underwater, but I've mentioned this to you before. I'm a PADI master with 8 specialties, but I don't want to go in the water up here because it's usually pretty cold. So I'm trying to figure out how do I get the camera down. You know, can I get it on a pole with an articulating arm or something, get it into position and shoot a kayaker going by? Can I do something from my kayak and show another one with an over and above with a split filter? What can I do in Wisconsin with what we have here that's going to be really interesting with this? And it's got so many possibilities. So I'm just waiting for it to get to be a little bit warmer and to just go hang out with some friends at the lake and just see what we come up with. The other thing I casually mentioned before was I have a star tracker now. So I want to go out and start tracking the stars. This is one of those devices that you get it lined up with Polaris, and it will just stay, on the Milky Way and let it burn in with long exposures. So I want to try that. I've always been interested in shooting stars, and I think this will take me to another level. So there's that, and I think it's just continuing. What can I do? We're still going to have a couple of months, I think, or a month here of sort of lockdown. So what can I do with people that are still serving us? How can I say thank you and give back a little bit with pictures? What idea can I come up with that's different than someone else's?
So it's just phenomenal to count you as part of the family, so to speak, now, and to have you share a lot of your work with us. I am thrilled to see the work that you do with the FP camera, because that's a camera that not a ton of people have tried with Outex. And so we've had a lot of questions about what to use for that camera. And a lot of times when people are using new gear, new technology, there are no dedicated housings for them, but they still want professional results. And frankly, that's where we come in. And so I am giddy at the prospects of the kind of results that you'll get out of it and your feedback, because we're always looking for input, and that's often how we do our innovation.
One thing I wanted to say to what you had said before is, what I want to do is come up with a picture with my housing that when you see it on social media, you'll go, yes, he did it, he came through.
Well, gauging by the work I've seen, I don't think it's going to take long. So, Jim, thank you so much. Really enjoyed our conversation, as I have every time we've met and talked. I mean what I say. I've been a big admirer. Everyone can find Jim's work on Instagram at Jim_Koepnick. And then you can also go to Koepnickphotography.com.